Flushing your boat's engine is a common practice to keep the cooling passages free of buildup and debris. Those that have seen our video on why outboards overheat know the importance of keeping an engine's cooling system clean. But it's not always the easiest thing to do if you leave the boat in the water or if you have it on a lift, which is why a lot of newer boats are coming out with a flushing system already incorporated into the boat, allowing you to flush your engines from inside of the boat without having to get onto the back of the transom or by leaning over the water trying to attach a flush attachment. So today we are going to install an internal flushing system to our outboard on our project boat to allow us a quick connect system inside of the boat where we can hook up the garden hose and easily flush out the engine. Something that I will say about making flush attachments is that you want to keep in mind your water hose pressure. For those of you that have multiple engines and you want to make just one hookup for the hose, of course this can be done, but remember that the water pressure that is normally going to be coming out of your water spigot at your house is only going to be around 40 to 45 psi unless you have a spigot that is before your pressure regulator in the hose. But we're not going into the plumbing that is at your dock. Instead, just know the more times that you split the hose to go to each extra engine, you are basically cutting that pressure in half. And if you're running them all at the same time, then you might not have enough water pressure to get the fresh water up into the top of the power head of the engine. Not to mention that most water hoses that are found going around the engine are normally only going to be around 3/8 inch hoses. And in order to keep that water volume up to get the water through the engine, you will need to have a lot higher pressure and volume coming out of the hose. In order to do that, you will need either larger pipes coming to your garden hose, making sure there aren't too many reductions in the line before it gets to the engine, like shutoff valves or splitters. And then you can also buy products that can increase your water pressure. Just keep in mind that the volume of water or gallons per minute portion of this equation is important. The smaller the hose or pipe, the less volume. The less volume, the less flushing you are doing. You can also have shutoffs on the splitters, allowing you to only flush 1 or 2 engines at a time in order to keep this pressure and volume up. But in our case, we only have one engine. And fortunately, we have a Mercury Verado, which is going to be one of the easiest engines to do something like this too. Almost every engine that has been manufactured in the last 20 years is going to have a garden hose flush attachment on it somewhere. Most Yamahas and Mercurys will have a hose on the side of the engine where you can unscrew the attachment and screw it directly onto your garden hose. Then other engines like Suzuki and Evinrude's, most of them will have a port on the back of the engine where you can screw the garden hose into, which makes it a pain to flush though on those engines without a quick disconnect or some kind of an adapter to screw into the engine. Otherwise you have to twist the hose up in order to get it to hook up to the engine, and you run the risk of ruining the threads on the flush port. Now what you want to do is get the engine cowling off and just follow the flushing hose coming from the flushing port. What we are going to do is then cut that hose, leaving a few inches on the flush port to still leave it operational. Then we'll add a T-fitting in between the two hoses that we just created by cutting the hose. We will then need to take a long 3/8 inch hose that we will run through the rigging tube and into the belly pan of the engine. It's important to make sure that this hose, and any wiring for that matter, is not anywhere that can get tangled up or block the shift actuator or the shifting mechanism that is found down there in the pan in front of the engine. But we can just route this hose over to our T-fitting and hook it up. Then we'll put hose clamps on each side of the fitting on all the hoses and put a zip tie around it to strap it up and hold it in place. With the engine part done, and once the hose has gone into the rigging tube and is inside the boat, we're going to need one of these here. This is just a chrome washdown outlet. It just allows us to screw a garden hose to it. Or we can put on some of these quick disconnects here. These are just some cheap garden hose quick disconnects that we got from the hardware store, and one of them has a shutoff valve on it so that we can leave it on the washdown outlet all the time so it doesn't get lost. And then the last thing we'll need are some reducers to be able to attach our 3/8 inch hose from the washdown fitting to the T-fitting that is in the engine. Now yes, this is a lot of reduction coming from the washdown fitting, and yes, these are dissimilar metals that normally you wouldn't want to put all together like this. Ideally, we would want to use a 1/2 inch hose barb fitting to a 1/2 inch hose and attach it to a T-fitting with two 3/8 inch fittings on one side and then one 1/2 inch fitting that the hose would attach to. But sadly, right now, a lot of stores are out of a lot of products due to the COVID issue, so this is just what we have available to build this system for you today. And since it's on a single engine application, this will be fine. So we'll put some sealant onto the threads of the hose barb fitting and the reducer and screw those two together. Then we can install the reducer into the washdown port and tighten that down. Once those are all together, we are ready to install this onto the boat. We want to find a suitable spot in the back of the boat to put this port, and for us, we have this starboard box that we built for our rigging to come up out of the deck, and so we'll be putting the port right here on the starboard. We will then take a hole saw that will allow the port to attach flushly against the starboard, drill out that hole, pre-drill the screws to hold the port on, and then seal it up and screw our port to the starboard. Now all we need to do is attach our hose to the hose barb and put a hose clamp on it, and we are ready to try it out. Since we are working with a Verado, we are going to have to seal up this flushing adapter here because it is made to allow water to flow through it if the flush fitting fails on the engine, allowing you to know when the fitting has failed. You can just take a piece of rubber and the garden hose gasket found in the flush adapter, cut out a circle of the rubber and replace the garden hose gasket with this piece of rubber to keep the water from pouring out of the fitting. Something else to keep in mind, depending on how much hose you have used, if that flush fitting fails, you can lose engine cooling water volume from the water pump, so if the engine starts to overheat, take this plug out and make sure that the flush fitting hasn't failed. But now we can just hook up the garden hose to our quick disconnects and the washdown port, turn the hose on from inside the boat and flush out the engine without even having to get out on the back of the boat. You'll want to make sure there aren't any leaks around any of the hose clamps or fittings, and then you are good to go. Now every engine is going to be different, and there are many ways of doing something like this. It just depends on what engine you have and how clean you want this to look. You can have this same type of setup just externally running to the transom of the boat if you want. Also, you might find on some older engines, the rigging hoses will be so packed that doing this won't even be possible to run the flushing hose through the rigging tube. So the external way is going to be the only way you can do it. You can also just use the quick disconnects on the ports if the flush fitting is on the back of the engine, and that will work as well. However you want to do it with your engine and your situation, hopefully this has given you some ideas of options to make your life easier when it comes to flushing out your engine. Now if you missed the overheating video, you should go check that out here. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and visit us at bornagainboating.com/shop to get your Born Again Boating fishing shirt. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next week.